This is Chris Carlson, and welcome to the Boulder Banking Podcast. My guest on this episode is Carle Churgin, co-founder and majority partner in Chain Reaction Partners, a firm that works with technical, scientific, and educational organizations to bring out the best in leaders and teams. We focused our conversation on Carle's work as a coach at the Executive Development Institute for Community Banking, a dynamic program offered by GSBC. We talk specifically about talent management and succession planning and how critical these are to the long-term success of all banks. Carle, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, it's a real pleasure, Chris. It's nice to talk to you.
Carle, we have a lot to talk about regarding the talent management project at EDI associated with the Graduate School of Banking in Colorado. But before we get into that, can you give us a brief background of yourself?
Sure. So I was born in Ohio, but I have spent most of my life in Colorado. So I'm right here by the Graduate School of Banking and also EDI. And my education and early work experience was in marketing communications and public relations. I also started a boutique high-tech PR company, which I ran for 5 years. But in 1998, I just had this inkling to switch. And I became a certified coach through the Coaches Training Institute. And I shifted my business focus to professional coaching and leadership development training. Part of the impetus for this was, as a PR person who had to tell stories, I realized in these high-tech companies that there was a lot of young people, mismanagement going on, people not actually being able to talk to each other. And I really felt a need for that to change. And I felt that through coaching that could happen. So personally, I'm married. I've been married for 35 years. I have 2 grown daughters and 4 grandchildren who live close by, and they are actually my biggest source of joy.
Well, Carle, tell us a little bit about your company, Chain Reaction Partners.
Yeah. So my husband and I are partners in this business. He's also a certified coach. And we just celebrated Chain Reaction's 20th anniversary this year. So over the years, we have had up to 5 partners in our business. And for the past several years, it's just been the 2 of us. And we have developed, designed, and co-lead our leadership programs together, specialize in leadership development training, team development, facilitation, executive coaching, and we've worked primarily in technology, scientific, financial, and government sectors for most of the business. That's where we focus.
Well, can you give us a brief background of EDI at Graduate School of Banking in Colorado?
Well, I thought about EDI. A background on EDI is probably not what I should be talking about, but I can talk to you about my association with the EDI. What I do know is EDI is an outgrowth of the Graduate School of Banking of Colorado, and it's primarily for people in the C-suite or on their way to being an executive in the bank. And each session has a cohort of somewhere between 10 and 15 people. And being with that group of like minds for 18 months is one of the highlights of EDI. So I started working with EDI in 2014. And at first I was brought on as a coach. I knew Dave Noling really well. In fact, Chain Reaction had delivered some leadership training and coaching to the Federal Reserve Bank. And that's where I met Dave. And we worked both here in Colorado and in Kansas City. I was brought on as a coach, and when this faculty member who was teaching talent and succession management had to drop out, I was asked to take over the class. And I have to say it was a learning curve for me as well as the participants. And it has evolved over the year. And while I was steeped in talent development. I was new to succession planning, and so I had to learn all there was about that. But what I do recognize now and have for several years is that talent development and succession planning go hand in hand. And the course is called Talent and Succession Management, but talent development and succession planning is actually a more accurate branding of this class than management, because it takes thought, it takes time, it takes concentration. And one thing that I remind people of is that it actually should be a part of your strategic planning and be ongoing, because that's how the bank will continue to succeed.
Well, what are some of the biggest challenges that banks have with talent management and succession planning?
Wow. I would say that that is changing as well. But as EDI works with community banks, there's always an issue with recruiting talent, especially in the smaller communities. And there is usually pretty high competition for the same people in those communities. There's also a lack of diversity that these banks can have if they're pulling from a small talent pool. And since several of the community banks are family owned, in those family owned banks, there's often an assumption that the next generation in line will take over. But because many of these banks, that's not always the case anymore, and that generation doesn't necessarily want to go into banking. So that's an issue for some of them. And because many of these banks have been led by the same person or the same family for so many years, there's often some stagnation and resistance to what the bank is willing to do differently. So here we are teaching these folks at EDI to put some new things into place, and sometimes there's resistance on the end. Additionally, there's a need to retain the current employees because there isn't a lot of other people to pull from. So the banks need to look at how are they going to offer ongoing training and mentoring and good benefits and promotional opportunities. And what employees want in those areas varies. So it requires them to actually have conversations with their employees and find out from them. What do you want? What are your goals? How can we help you get there? So innovation, recruiting, developing talent internally to get bench strength in the bank so that all of that can continue to operate without interruption is crucial and often overlooked. These are some of the challenges I think they face.
Carle, let me ask you this. We've certainly come through a very unique period in our history with COVID. How has the concept of remote work impacted the things that you just said?
Yes, that's a really good point. And we've discussed that actually in the last two talent development and succession planning classes that we've done. So one of the things that I think is that perhaps it's offered a new perspective to the community banks. So interestingly enough, financially, even though the banks, COVID impacted so many things, the banks were having some of the best years that they've ever had financially. And so with COVID coming on, they've had to switch in terms of their staffing. Many people did not go into the bank for a year. And so just figuring out how do we now deal with this? And this kind of goes hand in hand with technology, because what the banks are noticing too is now there's a lot of shift to online banking. There's a shift to hybrid employment where sometimes people come into the bank and sometimes they don't. It's caused a shift in the hours that they offer. It's caused a shift on really, do we need to have brick and mortar places for people to go? Where in the past in these community banks, it was often a place for their clients and their customers to come and hang out. It was a gathering place. What COVID did was take that away and create new options for people to get together, that kind of thing, rather than at the bank. And so the banks are looking at, do we need to shift our hours? Do we need to shift how many people we need in the bank? I mean, it has brought up a lot of things. In the area of recruiting, there are certain bank positions that actually do not need to be on site. And that opens up an entire new geography for them to be drawing in employees and talent. For example, IT or cybersecurity. People who are working that do not need to be on site at the bank. So that kind of opens up the talent pool, so to speak.
Well, I want to come back to something you said regarding succession planning. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand. And you were kind enough to share some ideas with me. So here's my direct question. How do regulators look at the subject of succession planning?
It's a good point, and it has actually become something that the regulators are looking at when they go in to the banks. There was a recent article on community banks from the Federal Reserve, and it was noted that proactive succession planning and management is a key governance tool in promoting the bank's resilience in difficult times. So, unfortunately, during COVID, many of these banks literally lost employees because of death and people deciding that this isn't what they wanted to do anymore, and they left. And so we have, these difficult times. Community bank directors, particularly those in small towns and rural areas, often comment that hiring and retaining key officers as well as their successors is challenging. So, given the importance of maintaining qualified leadership, any significant disruption can have a negative ramification on the bank. And a management succession program that is a living document and nimble enough to readjust in a timely fashion is an appropriate risk management tool. I found out this year by sitting through the enterprise risk management class that this project was actually a fundamental piece of risk management. There is management risk, and how are these banks addressing it? And the regulators go so far as to say that effective succession planning and management is crucial to the ongoing viability of any organization. And we are finding that to be so true, especially after this whole incident with COVID.
Well, from a global perspective, what impact do you feel that your project has had with the bank and bankers that you've been working with over the last several years?
I'm going to be totally speculating here, Chris, but I think it led the bankers to examine whether they actually had a succession plan or not. And to, if not, to really take on the challenge. Many have found that their managers, their executives appreciated the opportunity to look at this in a holistic view. So in many banks, we just have a succession plan for the board, or we just have a succession plan for our executives. But understanding how the whole bank can be impacted and which positions would be dire if somebody left or they were vacated for some reason has really opened the eyes of a lot of these banks. It has expanded their thinking on hybrid working and being able to look outside their community for talent. It has them looking forward to what kind of workers do we need not only to fill current needs, but also in the future. I happened to listen to one of your earlier podcasts with a futurist. She talked about the importance of paying attention to succession planning, one of the major things. And I think that this project may become a key component to the banks in their strategic planning going forward.
Well, that was a global perspective. Can you give us an example or two about something from success, and that way we can kind of drill down into something that really worked well? And of course, I don't expect you to give names unless you are authorized to do so. But if you don't, it'd be really interesting to see what they're doing specifically.
Right. So yes, as you mentioned, we coaches have confidential conversations with our coachees. So I'm not going to name names, but I do have a couple of things which stand out to me. One is early on, I coached a woman who actually was a real ball of fire. At the time, she was in an HR position. So when she was looking at this, she had the ability to implement some of these changes within her bank. So she designed her plan, presented it, and then she went back to the bank. And she had all employee team building and training for anyone who wanted it. She had people going out into the community and, working on charitable things and doing things that they thought were fun. She was so into fun. She raised morale by appointing people into roles besides their bank role. I remember her talking about, I don't know if this is the exact title, but it was basically a minister of fun. And that person's job was to make the culture a place to enjoy yourself and to come in smiling. And she would go up to people, how come you're not smiling today? What do you need? This woman was also a sports coach, and she found ways to bring out people's strengths and talents to create a great team in the bank. And to my joy, I heard recently that she is now the CEO of the bank, and she has not stopped her energetic leadership style, and that her main focus is still on the people and what do they want and how are they growing and what do they need. So I think that is a great success out of this. Many of my coaches have gone on to be presidents of their bank. And in the past 2 cohorts, I had 3 promoted and 2 are on the cusp of becoming presidents. And I'm only one of 5 coaches. So there are many, many stories like that.
That is awesome.
But I do want to say, I want to say one more thing if I can about this, Chris, and how I define success. Getting a promotion is not necessarily the goal of the EDI program. Although, I think it in itself is a succession planning case study because all of the people there are poised, if they want to move up in the organization. It's up to them. But I consider one coachee that I had. He was very young and very driven, and he was put in the role of president of his family's bank because everyone else had retired. No one else wanted it. And he felt an obligation to continue to make it successful for the stakeholders, even though he didn't really want that job. But he learned a lot at EDI and he implemented it. He went back and he tried. And he really had no support for it. So eventually he arranged for the bank to be acquired. He stayed with it under that acquisition in another position because he felt he needed to learn more and to provide continuity for his employees and to fulfill his obligations to his family. Eventually, I heard that he took another job much more aligned with his education and his passion, and he ended up in a position that made him so happy and fulfilled. And when I hear that, I consider that whole process and the ending to be a success.
Carly, it makes me think about that individual. He must have a tremendous amount of character to do the two things that you mentioned: take a job that he really didn't want, but he felt an obligation, and then the second part of the obligation to not abandon the bank when he sold it to the acquirer.
Yes, this is something that I have found with the people who attend EDI, Chris, and they all have a tremendous amount of character. They really want success. They want to do their best, and it just shows. They're not there to be lackadaisical or, scoot through this thing. If they do, they won't finish. They won't go through. But the people who are there and are devoted are taking all of this to heart. And I think that EDI brings out the best in these folks who want to make banking everything that it can be.
Well, Carly, let me ask you this before I let you get out of here today. What does the future of your project look like, given the fact that we're in a very unique industry in very unique times? How is it going to continue to evolve?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I can tell you from the point of view of the talent management and succession planning project, it's hard to say because it has changed almost every single year that I've been leading it based on the sophistication and the needs of the participants. So when I first started doing this, I don't think that many people had a succession plan. And now the people coming in, almost all of them do. So every year we try to be flexible with the content and what is going on in the world to make the biggest difference. And I would think with the changing community banking landscape, we're now in this digital world, including the popularity of online banking, cybersecurity, hybrid working, as we've already discussed, that there may be a difference in focus, allowing the bankers to get more creative in how they staff and what positions are truly critical, and having them really think about that and design that and be innovative in the way that they go forward. It may broaden the way they hire and retain staff. And I think the relevance of talent development and succession planning will stay around primarily because there is so much change going on. Change is the new normal. So giving them the opportunity to be adaptable and do what's right for their bank will be the future of this project.
Well, Carly, you shared some very interesting concepts today. If one of our listeners has a question or maybe wants to have a deeper conversation with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I think it would be through my email, which is my name, Carle, which is CARLE, at my company's name, Chain Reaction Partners with an S.com. And that's all one word.
Well, Carly, I know you have been incredibly busy. I know today has been a crazy day for you. I really appreciate you taking time out to visit with us today.
It was my pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much for your insightful questions. And I hope to talk to you again sometime.
I look forward to it, Carly. Thank you.
Thank you.